After 28 years of investigation, a millionaire finally reunites with his mother. This story is so incredible, so emotionally powerful, that it will completely change the way you think about destiny, family, and how far a mother will go to find her child. Marcus Thompson never imagined that a single phone call on a rainy Tuesday morning would shatter everything he thought he knew about his life. At 35 years old, this successful tech entrepreneur had built a fortune from nothing, always believing he was truly alone in this world. He had spent 28 years searching for answers about his past, hiring private investigators, scouring adoption records, and following every possible lead. But what he discovered that morning would change his entire existence forever. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse as Marcus stared at the manila envelope that had just been delivered by courier. His hands trembled as he read the return address: Riverside Children's Home, Archive Department. After nearly 3 decades of dead ends and false hopes, could this finally be the breakthrough he had been desperately waiting for? His heart pounded as he carefully opened the envelope, not knowing that inside lay the key to a mystery that had consumed his entire adult life. The first document he pulled out was a faded photograph, yellowed with age and slightly torn at the edges. It showed a young woman with kind eyes holding a baby, and on the back, someone had written in blue ink, "Sarah Mitchell and baby Marcus, 1989. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs as he stared at the image. This was the first time in his life he had ever seen a picture of his birth mother. But what he didn't know was that this photograph was just the beginning of a story so incredible, so heartbreaking, and so beautiful that it would restore his faith in the power of love and determination. As Marcus continued to examine the contents of the envelope, he found something that made his blood run cold. There was a second photograph, this one more recent, showing the same woman but aged by time and hardship. She was standing outside a small diner, wearing a faded apron and a tired smile. Across the bottom, someone had written, "Sarah Mitchell, Phoenix, Arizona. Current location confirmed." Marcus realized with shock that his mother was not only alive, but had been living just 2,000 miles away from him all this time. What Marcus couldn't have known was that while he had been searching for her with teams of private investigators and unlimited resources, she had been searching for him too, working double shifts at that small diner, saving every penny she could spare to hire help in finding the son she had never stopped loving. The question that would haunt him for the next few days was simple yet devastating. How had they both been searching for each other for so long without ever crossing paths? The next morning, Marcus found himself on a private jet bound for Phoenix, his mind racing with 1,000 questions and his heart filled with emotions he had never experienced before. He had spent the entire night reading through every document in that envelope, piecing together fragments of a story that broke his heart. His mother, Sarah Mitchell, had been just 17 years old when she gave birth to him, forced to give him up for adoption by circumstances beyond her control. But what Marcus didn't know yet was that she had never signed those papers willingly. As the plane descended into Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, Marcus clutched the folder containing everything he had learned about his mother. Sarah had been working at the same diner, Betty's family restaurant, for over 15 years. She lived in a small apartment above a laundromat, drove a 20-year-old Honda Civic, and according to the private investigator's notes, she had never married and had no other children. The report painted a picture of a woman who had dedicated her entire life to surviving and searching, never giving up hope that someday she would see her son again. The rental car felt like it was driving itself as Marcus navigated through the streets of Phoenix, following GPS directions to an address he had memorized. His hands were sweating despite the air conditioning, and his heart was beating so fast, he wondered if he might be having a panic attack. 28 years of wondering, 28 years of feeling incomplete, and now he was just minutes away from potentially meeting the woman who had given him life. But what terrified him most was a simple question. What if she didn't want to see him? As he pulled into the parking lot of Betty's family restaurant, Marcus saw her immediately through the large front window. Even though she was 28 years older than in that first photograph, he recognized her instantly. She was serving coffee to an elderly customer, her movements gentle and caring, her smile genuine despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. Marcus sat in his car for 10 minutes just watching her work, trying to build up the courage to walk through those doors and change both of their lives forever. What Marcus couldn't see from his car was that Sarah had developed a habit over the years of looking at every young man who walked into the diner, wondering if maybe, just maybe, One of them might be her son. She had never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that someday fate would bring them back together. As Marcus finally opened his car door and began walking toward the restaurant, neither of them realized that the moment they had both been dreaming about for nearly 3 decades was just seconds away. The bell above the door chimed softly as Marcus stepped into Betty's family restaurant, and the smell of coffee and home-cooked meals immediately reminded him of the childhood he had always wished he could remember. The diner was exactly what he had expected from the outside. Red vinyl booths, checkered linoleum floors, and the comfortable chaos of a place where locals gathered to share their lives over plates of comfort food. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her again, this time just 15 feet away from him. Sarah was wiping down a table when she looked up and saw him standing by the entrance. For a moment that seemed to last forever, their eyes met across the crowded diner and something electric passed between them. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat, not because she recognized him, but because something about this tall, well-dressed stranger felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. Marcus, on the other hand, was studying every detail of her face, comparing it to the photographs he had memorized, trying to find the courage to speak the words that would change everything. "Can I help you, honey?" Sarah asked as she approached him, her voice warm and welcoming in the way that had made her beloved by every regular customer at Betty's. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. How do you tell someone that you're the child they lost 28 years ago? How do you explain that you've traveled across the country because you believe they're your mother? Instead, he just stood there, looking into her kind brown eyes, feeling like he was drowning in emotions he didn't know how to process. "I'd like a table, please," Marcus finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded and led him to a booth by the window, the same window through which he had watched her just minutes before. As she handed him a menu, their fingers touched briefly, and both of them felt a jolt of something unexplainable. Sarah lingered for a moment longer than necessary, studying his face with a puzzled expression, as if she was trying to remember something important that was just out of reach. "Have we met before?" she asked suddenly, her voice filled with confusion. "You look so familiar to me." Marcus felt his heart stop. This was his moment, his chance to tell her the truth, but instead he just shook his head and looked down at the menu he couldn't focus on reading. What he didn't know was that Sarah was experiencing the same overwhelming sense of recognition, the same feeling that this stranger was somehow connected to the most important part of her past. As Sarah walked away to get his coffee, Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at the photograph he had scanned from the envelope. The resemblance was undeniable now that he was seeing her in person. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, even the way she moved her hands when she talked, it all felt like looking into a mirror that reflected not just his features, but his soul. He had inherited more than just her physical characteristics. He could see his own gestures and expressions reflected in everything she did. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. What would you do in Marcus's situation? Would you immediately tell her who you are, or would you wait to be absolutely certain? Leave me a comment below and let me know how you would handle meeting the mother you had searched for your entire life. And if this story is touching your heart like it is touching mine, leave your like. Sarah returned with his coffee and a slice of apple pie she insisted was on the house for such a nice young man. As she set the plate down, she noticed that his hands were shaking. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked, her motherly instincts immediately kicking in. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus almost laughed at how accurate her observation was. In a way, he was seeing a ghost. The ghost of the life he had always wondered about. The ghost of the mother he had dreamed about since he was old enough to understand what adoption meant. "I'm fine," Marcus lied, taking a sip of coffee that tasted like the best thing he had ever experienced. Not because of the coffee itself, but because his mother had served it to him. "Actually, I was wondering if I could ask you something personal." Sarah raised an eyebrow but nodded, her natural curiosity getting the better of her. "Have you lived in Phoenix your whole life?" Marcus asked, even though he already knew the answer from the investigation reports. Sarah shook her head, settling into the booth across from him as if drawn by an invisible force. "No, I moved here from Chicago when I was 25, she said, her voice taking on a distant quality. "I was looking for a fresh start, a new beginning after some difficult times." She paused, staring out the window for a moment before continuing. "I had lost someone very important to me, and I thought maybe a change of scenery would help me heal." What she didn't say was that the someone she had lost was her baby boy. and that no amount of distance had ever helped her forget him. The conversation continued for the next hour, with Sarah finding excuses to linger at Marcus's table between serving other customers. She told him about her life in Phoenix, about how she had worked her way up from dishwasher to head waitress at Betty's, about the small apartment she rented above the laundromat where she had lived for over a decade. What she didn't tell him was about the box of baby clothes she still kept in her closet, or about the birthday cake she bought herself every year on September 15th, the day her son had been born. Marcus listened to every word, memorizing the sound of her voice, the way she laughed at her own jokes, the gentle way she worried about whether he was eating enough. He learned that she had never married because she said she never found the right person. But what she didn't say was that she had never allowed herself to get too close to anyone, because part of her heart would always belong to the child she had been forced to give away. "You know," Sarah said suddenly, studying his face again with that same puzzled expression, "you remind me of someone, but I can't quite put my finger on who." She reached across the table and gently touched his hand. "Would you think I'm crazy if I said I felt like I had known you my whole life?" Marcus felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. This woman, this kind, loving woman who had spent 28 years wondering about her son, was sitting right here telling him that she felt connected to him, and she had no idea why. "Maybe we knew each other in another life," Marcus said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah laughed, but it was a sad laugh, the kind of laugh that comes from someone who has learned to find humor in heartbreak. "I used to believe in things like that," she said. "I used to believe that people who were meant to be together would always find their way back to each other, no matter what obstacles stood in their way." As the afternoon wore on and the diner began to empty out, Sarah found herself sharing things with this stranger that she had never told anyone else. She talked about the dreams she still had sometimes, dreams about a little boy with dark hair and brown eyes who would come running to her calling, "Mama." She talked about how she had kept the same phone number for 15 years, hoping that maybe someday he would try to find her. What she didn't realize was that Marcus had tried calling that number countless times, but it had been disconnected years before she got it. As closing time approached, Sarah began cleaning the tables around them, but she kept glancing over at Marcus as if she was reluctant to let him leave. Finally, she walked over to his booth and sat down across from him one more time. "I hope this doesn't sound too forward," she said, her voice slightly nervous. "But would you like to come back tomorrow? I work the morning shift, and I'd love to continue our conversation." Marcus felt his heart swell with an emotion so powerful it almost knocked him over. "I'd like that very much," he said, meaning it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. As he stood to leave, Sarah suddenly grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, her eyes wide with a realization that seemed to have hit her like lightning. "What did you say your name was?" Marcus realized with a start that in all their hours of conversation, he had never actually told her his name. "My name is Marcus," he said quietly, watching her face for any sign of recognition. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, and all the color drained from her face. "Marcus," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "I had a son named Marcus once." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge that neither of them was quite ready to cross. Marcus felt like the entire world had stopped spinning, and for a moment the only sound in the empty diner was the humming of the refrigerator and the beating of his own heart. "When was he born?" Marcus asked, even though he already knew the answer. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "September 15th, 1989. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, his hands shaking as he removed his driver's license and placed it on the table between them. Sarah looked down at it and saw his full name, Marcus James Thompson, and his birth date, September 15th, 1989. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at the license, then at Marcus's face, then back at the license as if she was trying to solve a puzzle that was too incredible to be real. "This can't be possible," she whispered. But even as she said the words, she knew in her heart that it was not only possible, it was true. After 28 years of searching, of hoping, of never giving up, her son had walked into her diner on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon disguised as a stranger. "Marcus?" Sarah whispered his name like a prayer, like a word she had been waiting her entire life to say again. "Is it really you?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the emotion that was choking him. Sarah stood up from the booth so quickly that she knocked over the salt shaker, but neither of them noticed as the white crystals scattered across the red formica table. She reached out with trembling hands to touch his face, as if she needed physical proof that this moment was really happening. "My baby," she sobbed, and suddenly Marcus was standing too, and they were holding each other in the middle of that empty diner, crying 28 years worth of tears. Sarah kept repeating, my baby," while Marcus held her as tightly as he could, afraid that if he let go, she might disappear like she had in so many of his childhood dreams. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus felt complete, like a puzzle piece that had finally found its place. "I never stopped looking for you," Sarah cried into his shoulder. "Not for a single day. I hired investigators when I could afford them. I called adoption agencies. I searched the internet for hours every night. I never gave up hope that someday I would see you again." Marcus pulled back to look at her face, seeing his own eyes reflected in hers, finally understanding where he had gotten his stubborn determination and his refusal to quit when things got difficult. "I looked for you too," Marcus told her, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on private investigators. I searched through every record I could get my hands on. I never understood why I couldn't find you." Sarah wiped her eyes with her apron, trying to compose herself enough to speak clearly. "They told me the adoption was closed," she said. "They said it would be better for both of us if we never tried to contact each other. But I never believed that. A mother's love doesn't just disappear because someone signs a paper." As they sat back down in the booth, Sarah reached across the table and took both of his hands in hers. "Tell me everything," she said. "Tell me about your life, about your childhood, about what you've been doing all these years. I want to know everything about the man my little boy grew up to become." Marcus smiled through his tears, realizing that he finally had someone who wanted to hear his whole story, someone who would love him unconditionally, no matter what he told her. Over the next 2 hours, as the sun set outside the windows of Betty's family restaurant, Marcus told his mother about his life. He told her about being adopted by the Thompsons, a kind couple who had loved him but could never fill the hole in his heart where questions about his birth family lived. He told her about building his technology company from nothing, about the sleepless nights when he would lie awake wondering if she ever thought about him, about the birthdays when he would wonder if she remembered what day it was. Sarah listened to every word, her eyes never leaving his face, as if she was trying to memorize every expression, every gesture, every moment of this miracle that had brought her son back to her. When he told her about his success, about the penthouse apartment and the private jets, she didn't seem impressed by the money. Instead, she seemed proud that he had worked hard and built something meaningful with his life. "I always knew you would do great things," she told him, squeezing his hands. "Even when you were a baby, you had this determined look in your eyes like you were going to take on the world and win." Marcus laughed, finally understanding where his competitive spirit had come from. "What about you?" he asked. "Tell me about your life. Tell me why you had to give me up." Before revealing what Sarah said, answer me in the comments. What would you do if you found out that your mother was forced to abandon you like Sarah was forced to abandon Marcus? The pain that crossed Sarah's face was immediate and profound. "I was 17 when you were born," she began, her voice growing quiet. "Your father was my high school boyfriend, and when I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. His parents moved him to another state, and I never saw him again. My own parents were so ashamed they threw me out of the house. I had nowhere to go and no way to support a baby." Sarah wiped away fresh tears as she continued. "I lived in a shelter for unwed mothers during my pregnancy, and they kept telling me that adoption was the only responsible choice. They said a teenage girl with no education and no family support couldn't possibly raise a child properly. They made me believe that giving you up was the most loving thing I could do for you. But the moment they put you in my arms," Sarah continued, her voice breaking with the memory, "I knew I had made a terrible mistake. You looked right at me with those beautiful brown eyes, and I felt a connection so strong it was like nothing I had ever experienced. I tried to change my mind, but they told me it was too late, that the papers were already signed and the adoptive family was waiting." Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, not at his mother, but at the system that had separated them, at the people who had convinced a scared 17-year-old girl that she wasn't capable of loving her own child. "What happened after?" he asked gently, not wanting to cause her more pain, but needing to understand the story of the years they had lost. "I finished high school while working 2 jobs, Sarah said, straightening her shoulders with a pride that Marcus recognized as his own. "I put myself through community college, learned office skills, and tried to build a life that would be worthy of you if you ever came back to me. But no matter what I accomplished, no matter how stable my life became, there was always this emptiness where you should have been. Sarah reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From inside, she carefully extracted a small hospital bracelet, yellowed with age and barely readable. "This is the only thing I had left of you," she said, placing it gently on the table between them. "Your hospital bracelet from when you were born. I've carried it with me every day for 28 years. Marcus stared at the tiny bracelet, overwhelmed by the realization that his mother had kept this small piece of him close to her heart through all the years of separation. He reached into his own wallet and pulled out something that made Sarah gasp. A small silver locket that his adoptive mother had given him when he turned 18, telling him it had come with him from the adoption agency. "Open it," Sarah whispered, her hands trembling. Marcus opened the locket to reveal a tiny photograph so small he had never been able to make out the details. But now, sitting across from his mother, he could see that it was a picture of Sarah holding him as a newborn baby, taken just hours before she had been forced to give him up. "I gave that locket to the adoption agency," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I begged them to make sure you got it when you were old enough, so you would know that your birth mother had loved you enough to want you to have a piece of her with you always." Marcus looked down at the locket he had worn around his neck for 17 years, finally understanding its true significance. His mother had never stopped loving him, had never forgotten him, and had found a way to stay connected to him even when they were separated by thousands of miles and an impenetrable wall of bureaucracy. The next few days passed like a beautiful dream that neither of them wanted to wake up from. Marcus extended his stay in Phoenix indefinitely, spending every moment he could at the diner with Sarah, learning about her life and sharing stories of his own. He met her regular customers, who had become like family to her over the years, and they all embraced him as if he had always been part of their extended diner family. Sarah showed him her small apartment above the laundromat, and Marcus was amazed by how neat and organized she kept everything, despite having so little space. But what touched him most was the box she pulled out from under her bed, filled with things she had saved for him over the years. Birthday cards she had written but never sent, newspaper clippings about successful young men named Marcus, and a dozen teddy bears that she had bought him for every Christmas he had missed. "I know it seems silly," she said, embarrassed by the collection of childhood toys she had accumulated for a son who was now a grown man. "But I needed to believe that someday you would come home, and I wanted to have something to give you from all the years we lost." Marcus picked up each teddy bear, imagining his mother shopping for them alone, thinking about the child she couldn't hold, and his heart broke all over again for both of them. But their reunion wasn't just about the past. It was about building a future together. Marcus learned that Sarah had dreams she had never pursued, places she had never traveled, experiences she had denied herself because she was always saving money for the search for her son. Now that they had found each other, Marcus was determined to help her live all the dreams she had put on hold. "I want you to quit your job at the diner," Marcus told her on their 4th day together. Sarah looked at him with surprise and a little bit of concern. "Sweetheart, I appreciate the thought, but I need to work. I can't just sit around doing nothing." Marcus smiled, understanding now where he had gotten his strong work ethic. "I'm not asking you to do nothing," he said. "I'm asking you to do everything you've always wanted to do but couldn't afford." Marcus explained his plan. He wanted to buy Sarah a house, not a mansion or anything ostentatious, but a comfortable home with a garden where she could grow her own vegetables and flowers. He wanted to pay for her to travel to all the places she had dreamed of seeing, to take cooking classes if she wanted them, to pursue any hobby or interest that brought her joy. Most importantly, he wanted to spend time with her, to make up for at least some of the years they had lost. "But I don't want your money," Sarah protested, her pride showing in every word. "I didn't search for you all these years so that you could take care of me financially. I just wanted to know that you were happy and healthy and loved." Marcus took her hands in his, understanding her independence but wanting her to understand his perspective too. "Mom," he said, and they both paused at the word, still getting used to the reality of their relationship. "You've been taking care of yourself for 28 years. You've been strong and independent and amazing, and I'm so proud to be your son. But now you don't have to do it alone anymore. Let me take care of you the way you would have taken care of me if we had never been separated." Sarah wiped away tears, finally beginning to accept that this incredible turn of events was really happening. "There is one thing I've always wanted to do," she admitted shyly. "I've always wanted to see the ocean. I've lived my whole life in landlocked states, and I've always wondered what it would be like to stand on a beach and watch the waves. Marcus grinned, already planning their first trip together as a family. 2 weeks later, Marcus and Sarah stood together on Malibu Beach, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and pink. Sarah had never seen anything so beautiful in her life, but what made the moment perfect wasn't the scenery. It was sharing it with her son. She had spent so many years imagining what it would be like to experience life's beautiful moments with him, and now she finally could. "Thank you," she whispered, slipping her arm through his as they walked along the water's edge. "Not just for bringing me here, but for never giving up on finding me. I know there must have been times when it seemed hopeless." Marcus shook his head, understanding now that giving up had never really been an option. "I think somewhere deep inside I always knew you were looking for me too," he said. "Maybe that's what kept me going." They spent a week in California, doing all the touristy things that Sarah had only seen in movies. They went to Hollywood, visited theme parks, took a boat tour around San Francisco Bay, and ate at restaurants that cost more for one meal than Sarah used to make in a week. But the best moments weren't the expensive activities. They were the quiet conversations over room service breakfast, the shared laughter at inside jokes they were creating together, and the simple miracle of being able to say good morning and good night to each other every day. But as wonderful as their reunion had been, Marcus knew that they needed to address the elephant in the room. What happened next? He lived in New York. She had built a life in Phoenix, and they were both going to have to figure out how to maintain their relationship across the distance. The thought of saying goodbye, even temporarily, was almost unbearable for both of them. On their last night in California, as they sat on the hotel balcony overlooking the ocean, Sarah brought up the subject they had both been avoiding. "I know you have to go back to your real life eventually," she said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the sadness in her voice. "I don't want you to feel obligated to rearrange your whole world just because we found each other." "What if I told you I wanted to rearrange my whole world?" Marcus asked, turning to face her in the moonlight. "What if I said that nothing in my life has ever felt as right as these past few weeks with you?" Sarah looked at him with surprise, hope, and a little bit of concern. "Marcus, you have a business to run, a life you've built. You can't just abandon everything for me." Marcus had been thinking about this conversation for days, and he knew exactly what he wanted to say. "I've spent my entire adult life building a company, making money, achieving success, but I've never felt truly happy or fulfilled. Do you know why?" Sarah shook her head. "Because I was always searching for something I couldn't even name. Now I know what it was. I was searching for family, for connection, for someone who would love me just for who I am, not for what I've accomplished." He stood up and began pacing the balcony, his excitement building as he shared his vision. "I can run my company from anywhere. I can hire managers to handle the day-to-day operations in New York, but I can't hire anyone to be my mother, and I can't get back the years we've already lost." Sarah felt her heart swelling with love and pride for this incredible man who was her son. "Are you saying you want to move to Phoenix?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. Marcus laughed, the first truly carefree laugh she had heard from him since they met. "I'm saying I want to move wherever you want to live. If you love Phoenix, we'll stay in Phoenix. If you want to try somewhere new, we'll go somewhere new together. For the first time in my life, I have a real family, and that's more valuable to me than any business deal or financial success." Before I tell you what Sarah decided, let me ask you this. What's the most important thing in your life? Is it career success, financial security, or the relationships you have with the people you love? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because I think Sarah's answer might surprise you. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring out at the ocean waves as she processed everything Marcus had said. Finally, she turned to him with a smile that lit up her entire face. "You know what I realized while we've been here together?" she asked. "I've spent 28 years living in the past, holding on to memories and regrets. But these past few weeks with you have taught me something important. Home isn't a place, it's the people you love." "So what are you saying?" Marcus asked, his heart pounding with anticipation. Sarah stood up and took his hands in hers. "I'm saying that I've been working at that diner for 15 years, saving money and searching for you. Now that I've found you, I don't need to stay in Phoenix anymore. Maybe it's time for both of us to start fresh somewhere new, together." The next few months were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Marcus sold his penthouse in Manhattan but kept his business. transitioning to remote management with trips to New York only when absolutely necessary. Sarah gave her notice at Betty's family restaurant, and her co-workers threw her the biggest farewell party the diner had ever seen. Everyone was sad to see her go, but they were all thrilled that she had finally found her son. They decided to settle in San Diego, where they could have the ocean Sarah loved and the warm weather that reminded them of their reunion in Phoenix. Marcus bought a beautiful house with a guest wing so they could be close to each other while still maintaining their independence. The house had a large kitchen where Sarah could indulge her love of cooking, and a garden where she could grow all the flowers and vegetables she had dreamed of tending. But the most important room in the house was the family room, where they spent their evenings talking, watching movies, and making up for all the conversations they had missed over the years. They established traditions like Sunday morning breakfast together, evening walks on the beach, and weekly phone calls to Marcus's adoptive parents, who had welcomed Sarah into their extended family with open arms. 6 months after their reunion, Marcus and Sarah were hosting their first Thanksgiving dinner together in their new home. Marcus had invited his adoptive parents, and Sarah had flown in her closest friends from Phoenix, including several regular customers from Betty's who had become like family to her over the years. As they all gathered around the dining room table, Marcus stood up to make a toast. "A year ago I thought I had everything a person could want," he began, looking around the table at all the faces of people he loved. "I had financial success, a beautiful home, and all the material possessions anyone could desire, but I was missing the most important thing of all, family." He turned to look at Sarah, who was beaming with pride and love. "Mom, you taught me that the best things in life aren't things at all. They're relationships, connections, and the love we share with the people who matter most." Sarah wiped away tears of happiness as Marcus continued his toast. "I want to thank everyone here for welcoming our family with such open hearts. And I want to thank my adoptive parents for loving me and supporting me through all the years I spent searching for answers about my past. You gave me the foundation I needed to become someone worthy of finding my birth mother again." The dinner was filled with laughter, storytelling, and the comfortable chaos of a large family gathering. But the most meaningful moment came after dessert, when Sarah pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a wrapped package. Inside, he found a leather-bound photo album filled with pictures from their reunion and the months that followed. On the first page she had written, "To my son Marcus, who taught me that miracles do happen, and that a mother's love can survive any separation and overcome any obstacle. Thank you for never giving up on finding me, and thank you for giving me a reason to believe in happy endings." Marcus hugged her tightly, finally understanding that this was what he had been searching for his entire life. Not just answers about his past, but a future filled with love and family. As their first year together drew to a close, Marcus and Sarah had developed a routine that felt as natural as if they had never been separated. Sarah had started volunteering at a local children's home, sharing her story with teenage mothers and helping them understand their options without pressure or judgment. Her experiences had taught her that every situation was different, and that the most important thing was making sure both mothers and children knew they were loved and supported. Marcus had used his business success to establish the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, named after his mother, which provided support and resources for birth mothers and adoptive families. The foundation offered counseling, financial assistance, and most importantly, help for families who wanted to find each other. They had already facilitated dozens of reunions, and each success story reminded Marcus of how blessed he was to have found his own mother. One evening, as they sat on their deck watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, Sarah asked Marcus a question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Do you ever wonder about your birth father?" she asked gently. "I know it's a complicated subject, but I've always wondered if you were curious about him too." Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "I used to wonder about him," Marcus admitted. "But honestly, after finding you and seeing how much you sacrificed and suffered because he abandoned you both, I'm not sure I want to know him. He made his choice 28 years ago when he decided that running away was easier than taking responsibility. You're the parent who matters, the one who never stopped loving me even when you couldn't be with me." Sarah squeezed his hand, understanding his feelings but wanting to make sure he didn't close any doors he might want to open someday. "I just want you to know that if you ever change your mind, I'll support whatever decision you make. My anger toward him is about what he did to me, not about what relationship you might or might not want to have with him." Marcus smiled, grateful once again for his mother's wisdom and unconditional love. 2 years after their reunion, Marcus surprised Sarah with a trip to Chicago, where she had grown up and where he had been born. They visited the hospital where she had given birth to him, now renovated and modernized but still standing as a monument to the beginning of their story. They stood together in front of the building, both thinking about that scared 17-year-old girl who had made the hardest decision of her life in those rooms decades ago. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Do you wish you had tried harder to keep me?" Sarah turned to look at him with tears in her eyes, but they were tears of love, not sadness. "I regret that we lost 28 years together," she said honestly. "But I don't regret the decision because it led you to parents who loved you and gave you opportunities I couldn't have provided. And ultimately, it led us back to each other." They spent the week in Chicago exploring Sarah's childhood neighborhood, visiting her old high school and even driving past the house where she had grown up. Her parents had both passed away years earlier, never knowing that they had missed the chance to know their grandson. But Sarah felt a sense of closure in showing Marcus the places that had shaped her early life. On their last day in Chicago, they visited the cemetery where Sarah's parents were buried. She placed flowers on their graves and whispered, "I wish you could have met your grandson. He turned out to be everything I always knew he would be." Marcus stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, understanding that forgiveness was a gift she was giving herself as much as them. The trip to Chicago had answered questions for both of them, but more importantly, it had reinforced something they both already knew. Their future was more important than their past. They had wasted enough time on regret and what-if scenarios. Now they were focused on making the most of every day they had together as a family. Today, 5 years after that life-changing afternoon at Betty's family restaurant, Marcus and Sarah Thompson Mitchell have built a life together that surpasses both of their wildest dreams. They hyphenated their last names as a symbol of their blended family, honoring both the parents who raised Marcus and the mother who never stopped searching for him. Their San Diego home has become a gathering place for an extended family that includes Marcus's adoptive parents, Sarah's friends from Phoenix, and dozens of families they've helped reunite through their foundation. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation has grown into a nationwide organization that has facilitated over 300 family reunions. They've helped teenage mothers make informed decisions about their futures, supported adoptive families through the complex emotions of open adoptions, and most importantly, they've proven that love can overcome any obstacle when people refuse to give up hope. Marcus often says that finding his mother didn't just change his life. It gave him a purpose that all his business success never could. Sarah, now 52, has discovered talents and passions she never knew she had. She's learned to paint watercolor seascapes, has traveled to 12 countries with Marcus, and has written a book about their reunion that's being turned into a major motion picture. But her favorite role is still the simplest one, being Marcus's mom. She never misses an opportunity to tell people about her son, and Marcus never gets tired of introducing her as my mom, my hero, and my best friend. Every September 15th, on Marcus's birthday, they return to Betty's family restaurant in Phoenix, where a small plaque now commemorates the spot where they were reunited. The current owners have embraced the story, and the booth where they sat during that first conversation has become known as the Miracle Table. Couples celebrating anniversaries request it, families gathering for special occasions choose it, and everyone who sits there learns about the power of never giving up on love. But perhaps the most beautiful part of their story is how it's inspired others. They receive hundreds of letters each month from people who have been motivated by their reunion to search for lost family members, to forgive old hurts, or to simply appreciate the relationships they already have. Marcus and Sarah have learned that their story isn't just about them. It's about the universal human need for connection, love, and belonging. As I finish telling you this incredible true story of love, determination, and the miracle of reunion, I want you to think about the relationships in your own life. Who are the people you love? When was the last time you told them how much they mean to you? Marcus and Sarah lost 28 years together, but they didn't waste time dwelling on what they couldn't change. Instead, they focused on making every day count from the moment they found each other. Their story proves that it's never too late for a happy ending, that miracles can happen in the most ordinary places, and that a mother's love truly can survive any separation. If you have family members you've lost touch with, if there's someone you've been meaning to call, if there's a relationship in your life that needs healing, Let Marcus and Sarah's story inspire you to take that first step. Share this video with someone you love, because stories like this remind us that the most important things in life aren't things at all. They're the connections we make and the love we share with the people who matter most. And if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in the power of love, hope, and human connection. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are really just the beginning of an even more beautiful story.